The sun was sinking low, staining the horizon a feverish red as Dry Creek held its breath. Dust drifted like smoke around the wooden platform outside the sheriff's office, where a crude auction was winding down. The heat had baked the boards until they creaked, and the men gathered or stood still as fence posts, their faces carved by sun and suspicion. On the platform, the quiet Apache girl stood barefoot, hands bound loosely with rope, her gaze fixed on nothing, or maybe on something far beyond them all. Her hair hung in black ropes against her cheeks. She did not blink when the auctioneer called out her price, voice rasping like a whetstone. "Half price of the silent one," he said, his grin a split in dry leather. "She don't speak, don't smile, and won't lift a finger lest you make her." A few men laughed. Others spat. The laughter rang hollow against the hard air. None stepped forward. "Come now." The auctioneer barked, sweat glistening on his temple. "Ain't every day you get your own servant, or whatever you fancy, for half what she's worth." The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. Even the horses tethered nearby seemed to sense the wrongness of it. The girl didn't flinch under their stares. She stood with her back straight, her small frame unmoving, her eyes like dark wells that no one dared look into for long. The sheriff watched from the shade of his porch, a toothpick between his lips, pretending not to care. The war had ended years ago, but in towns like Dry Creek, the dust still settled on old wounds. The auctioneer tried again. "Half price." His voice cracked. "Ain't nobody got coin enough for a quiet woman?" Someone snorted. "Don't want no ghost, Al." The auctioneer's smile faltered. He slapped the plank with his hat. Hell with it. He reached for the rope, ready to drag her off the block and back to the holding pen. That's when the stranger spoke. "I'll take her." The words were quiet, but cut through the murmurs like a blade through cloth. Heads turned. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, hat low over his brow, a coat the color of old clay hanging from his shoulders. The dust of the trail still clung to him, and his eyes were pale, washed-out blue, like water seen through smoke. No one knew his name, but everyone in Dry Creek recognized his kind, a rider who carried his sins in his saddlebags. The auctioneer squinted. "You got coin, mister?" He reached into his coat and tossed a small pouch that landed on the platform with a dull jingle. "That enough?" The auctioneer loosened the tie, peered inside, and nodded. "More than enough." The crowd muttered. One man spat at the ground. "Damn fool," someone said. "Gonna get himself killed." The stranger ignored them. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and climbed onto the platform. The boards groaned beneath his boots. He pulled a knife from his belt, its blade dull but sure, and cut the rope from the girl's wrists. She didn't thank him. She didn't even look at him at first. But when he turned, motioning toward his horse, she followed. Her movements were measured, graceful in their restraint, like a wild thing testing the distance between freedom and danger. As they walked through the thinning crowd, the sun burned down to a crimson coin. The townsfolk parted silently, as if the pair carried a sickness that could spread with touch. Somewhere, a piano clanked out a tune inside the saloon, then fell silent again. At the hitching post, the stranger untied his horse, a lean bay with a scarred flank. He mounted, then looked down at her. "You can ride." She hesitated, then nodded once. He reached down a calloused hand. After a moment, she took it. Her fingers were light, but cold. He pulled her up behind him, and together they turned toward the open road. Behind them, the auctioneer called after, half in jest, half in warning, "Don't say I didn't tell you. Stranger, she ain't worth half you paid." The cowboy didn't answer. The girl didn't look back. The town shrank behind them, its windows glinting like eyes that refused to blink. Ahead stretched the desert, flat, endless, alive with a wind that whispered across the sand. The first stars began to pierce the bruised sky. He rode in silence for a long time, the reins loose in his hands, the rhythm of the horse's hooves steady as a heartbeat. Once he glanced back at her. She was looking at the horizon, face unreadable, eyes reflecting what light remained. "You got a name?" he asked quietly. She didn't reply. He nodded as if her silence was answer enough. "Didn't figure you did." They rode on. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from faraway hills. Somewhere behind them, thunder rolled, soft and distant like a memory. When they reached the ridge, he reined in. From up there, Dry Creek was no more than a smudge of lamplight against the dying sun. He studied it a moment, then spat into the dirt. "Town like that," he muttered, "ain't got much left worth buying." The girl's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. He urged the horse forward again, and they descended into the purple dark. The sound of hooves faded into the night, swallowed by the endless stretch of desert. Far behind them, a single bell rang from the church tower, marking sundown. To those left in town, it was nothing but another day ending. To the two riders vanishing into the wilderness, it was the first toll of something beginning. They rode for miles without a word. The sky deepened from bruised violet to black, and the desert spread around them like an ocean of stone. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather and the slow, measured rhythm of the horses' hooves. When they finally stopped, the moon was rising, a thin silver blade above the mesas. The cowboy swung down first, his boots crunching in the grit. He unstrapped his canteen and held it out to her. She hesitated before taking it, her movements wary, like an animal not yet sure of the trap. She drank sparingly and handed it back without looking up. The firelight from the small blaze he built painted her face in flickers. Hard one moment, soft the next, like the shifting of a mask. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching the flames curl upward into the cold. The desert was silent, except for the pop of burning wood. "You got folks somewhere?" he asked. The question drifted between them, weightless, already dying in the air. She didn't answer. He nodded, as if that was what he expected. "Didn't figure you did." He opened a tin of beans and passed it to her. She ate with slow precision, eyes always scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. He noticed the scars on her wrist again, thin, pale lines that told stories he didn't want to know. After a while, he said, "You don't have to be afraid. I ain't one of them." She looked up then, just briefly. Her eyes caught the firelight, dark, steady, and old. He saw no fear there, only something colder. She set down the tin and spoke for the first time, her voice low and rough from disuse. "You're all the same." He didn't argue. He stared into the fire, jaw tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The words stung because they carried truth. Once, years back, he had ridden with men who wore uniforms instead of dust. He remembered the sound of gunfire against the canyon walls, the screams that wouldn't fade. He had turned his horse and ridden away that night, but he had never truly left. The wind shifted, carrying with it a distant echo, a faint drum of hooves. His head snapped up. She had already heard it. Her body had gone still, every sense sharpened. He kicked dirt over the fire, and the world dropped into darkness. The stars blazed fierce and cold overhead. "They're tracking us," he murmured. Her hand brushed his sleeve, light as a whisper. "They are close." He motioned to the horse, and they moved quickly, leading the animal into the dry wash that cut through plain. The moon slid behind a cloud, and the night became a black river. Behind them, faint voices carried, men calling, laughing, confident, bounty hunters, maybe, or worse. He led her along the wash, the sand soft beneath their boots, their breaths shallow. The sound of pursuit grew louder, then dipped, then rose again like wolves circling. When the first shot cracked through the dark, it came from far off, a warning, not a kill. The horse reared, nostrils flaring. The cowboy caught the reins, steadying the beast, then turned to her. "Run if you get the chance." She shook her head, silent but firm. The wind picked up, pulling strands of her hair across her face. Her eyes met his for an instant, and in that glance he saw no helplessness, no plea, only resolve. They climbed out of the wash and pressed toward a line of boulders under the ridge. Bullets struck the sand behind them, sparking dust. He pulled her down beside him, breath ragged. "Stay low." The riders appeared over the hilltop, silhouetted by moonlight. 3 of them, maybe 4. He counted the flashes of rifles, gauged the distance. His revolver was already in his hand, heavy and familiar. He waited. The night held its breath. Then he fired once. A cry answered, 1 man down. The others scattered, cursing into the wind. The girl's hand darted to his belt. She pulled his spare pistol and fired without hesitation. The shot rang clean, and another rider fell. When it was over, the silence returned with brutal suddenness. The two remaining men retreated into the dark, their hoofbeats fading like a dying drum. The cowboy turned to her. The gun still smoked in her hand. Her expression hadn't changed. "You ever done that before?" he asked. She shook her head once. "You don't miss." She didn't smile, didn't move, only looked toward the horizon, where the moon was climbing free of the clouds. "They will come again." He knew she was right. They sat in the cold sand until the tremor of pursuit faded into memory. He holstered his revolver, muscles aching, then turned to her. "You could have run." "I did once," she said quietly. It did not help. He studied her in the pale light, realizing for the first time that her silence wasn't born of fear. It was a weapon, a kind of armor. Whatever had been taken from her, she had rebuilt herself from the ruins, piece by piece, until only steel remained. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhausted. Guess we're both ghosts then. She tilted her head, uncertain of his meaning. He didn't explain. Some truths sounded smaller when spoken aloud. They made camp again before dawn, hidden among the rocks. He built no fire this time. The desert was bitter cold, the kind that crept into bones, but neither complained. He gave her his coat. She took it without thanks, but wrapped it tight. The first light of morning was thin and silver. It brushed across their faces, revealing the exhaustion, the dust, the unspoken questions hanging between them. He leaned back against a stone, hat tipped low over his eyes. "If we're lucky, we'll reach the ridge by sundown. There's a canyon beyond it. Good place to lay low." She nodded, pulling the coat tighter. "And after?" He thought about that for a long time. "After?" he echoed. "We'll see if the world still has room for the likes of us." She looked east, where the horizon blazed faintly with the promise of dawn. For the first time, he saw something flicker across her face, something that might have been hope, or maybe only the reflection of the rising sun. They mounted the horse again, the desert stretching wide and silent around them. As they rode toward the light, the air carried a faint smell of rain and gunpowder, mingling like two halves of the same fate. By noon they reached the red cliffs of Blood Mesa, the air heavy with heat and silence. The land rose in jagged shelves, each stratum the color of old wounds. The cowboy guided the horse along a dry creek bed until they came to a hollowed-out cabin clinging to the edge of the canyon, a forgotten shelter left behind by miners who had long since fled. He dismounted stiffly, feeling the ache in his shoulder from the fight. The girl slid down after him, light as breath. Her eyes swept the horizon, alert to every shimmer and shadow. They had not spoken much since the gunfire in the night. The space between them had thickened with unsaid things. Inside, the cabin was half collapsed, but the roof held. Dust motes drifted through the slats, turning into beams of light like lost spirits. He set his saddle by the wall and dropped his coat beside it. The air smelled of rust and dry wood. "We'll rest here a bit," he said. "I'll patch this up before it festers." He tore a strip from his shirt, cleaned the wound with whiskey, and wrapped his shoulder. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable. When he offered her the bottle, she only shook her head. There was a fireplace, long dead. He gathered what scraps of timber he could find and coaxed a small flame to life. She crouched beside it, holding her hands to the warmth. For a moment, the flicker softened the sharp lines of her face. He studied her across the firelight. "Back there, when you fired that pistol," he said, "you didn't hesitate." She looked up, eyes steady. "I knew what needed doing." He nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Myself, before I forgot what I was." Her gaze didn't waver. "And what are you now?" He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Tired. Mostly tired." A long silence followed. The wind whistled through the cracks in the cabin. She pulled a piece of charcoal from the ashes and began tracing something on the floorboards, a circle crossed by two lines, then small marks around its edges. A symbol. He leaned forward, studying it. "I've seen that before," he said, voice low. "Painted on a canyon wall north of here. The night it all went bad." Her hand stilled. She looked up at him sharply, The quiet, suddenly dangerous. He swallowed. It was years back. I was riding with the 7th. We were sent to clear a camp along the river. They said it was a rebel band. Turned out it was families. He stared at the floor, at the charcoal mark now smeared beneath his boot. I didn't shoot, but I didn't stop it either. The air between them turned thin, almost brittle. She rose. Every movement slow, controlled. Her eyes were black glass. "You were there," she said, her voice stripped of emotion. "At the river." He didn't answer. The fire popped once, breaking the stillness. She stepped back until her shoulder met the wall. Her hands were trembling, not with fear, but with something older, deeper. "You came to buy what was left," she whispered. His jaw clenched. "No, I came because I couldn't stand what they'd done. Because I couldn't look at myself no more. You paid for me. I paid to set you free." The words hung there, hollow and helpless. He wanted to reach for her, but his hand stayed at his sides. She sank down by the fire again, drawing a line in the dust between them with the tip of the charcoal. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "You cross that, you die." He nodded once. "Fair." The wind rose outside, hissing through the canyon like a warning. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called, a dry, rasping sound that echoed against the cliffs. He moved to the door and peered into the glare. Tracks in the sand, fresh, deep. "They found us," he said. She didn't move. He turned back. "You hear me? We've got to go." Her gaze was still on the fire. "They'll come whether we run or not." He wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. She had lived through enough hunts to know when running no longer mattered. He checked his rifle, reloaded with slow precision. "If they come, I'll meet them out front. I won't let them take you again." She didn't answer, but he caught the faintest flicker in her eyes, a mix of anger and something almost like pity. He went outside. The afternoon light had turned harsh, bleaching the canyon walls to the color of bone. Dust swirled in tight spirals around his boots. He could see them now. 3 riders, cutting across the flats, rifles slung over their backs. Bounty men, the same that had chased him before, drawn by greed and rumor. He stepped back into the cabin. 3 of them, maybe more behind. She rose to her feet. "You can't fight them all." "Don't plan to," he said. "Just plan to make it count." She stared at him, and for the first time since they met, her eyes softened. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I owe a debt, and I figure it's time it got paid." Her lips parted, but no words came. He turned to the fire, tossed a handful of dirt over it, and darkness swallowed the room. "Get some rest if you can. We move at first light." But neither of them slept. The night was too heavy with ghosts. He lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the walls, and thought of the river, of the smoke and the screams and the smell of burning hide. He thought of the faces he could not forget, across the dying coals. She sat motionless, her eyes open, watching him through the dim. Somewhere deep in that gaze, he saw the faintest tremor of uncertainty, whether she wanted him dead for his sins or alive to make amends. When dawn came, red and raw, it found them both still waiting. Outside, the riders were closer, their silhouettes black against the fire-colored sky. He stood, rolling his shoulders, feeling the ache of his wound and the weight of what was coming. "Stay inside," he said. She rose too, and in her eyes he saw her answer before she spoke. "No." The light poured through the cracks like blood through a wound. The air trembled with the echo of hoofbeats, growing nearer, nearer still. They stood side by side, 2 ghosts framed against the glow of a dying sun, waiting for the reckoning neither could outrun. The canyon was a furnace of red and gold as dawn spilled over Blood Mesa, turning the cliffs to fire and shadow. The riders were coming, silhouettes against the horizon, their horses' hooves drumming a slow, relentless rhythm. The cowboy stood outside the cabin, rifle in hand, shoulders squared despite the ache in his side. His eyes scanned approaching figures, calculating, weighing the odds. Behind him, the girl watched through the slats, her body tense, her fingers brushing the grip of her own pistol. The lead rider raised a hand, signaling. "Step aside. Stranger, that girl belongs to us." Surrender her, and maybe we'll let you walk away." He spat into the dust. "She belongs to no one," he said. His voice was low, calm, carrying the weight of someone who had nothing left to lose. The men dismounted, spreading out with deliberate care. Rifles raised, they advanced, boots scraping against stone and sand. The cowboy's heart hammered, but his breathing stayed measured. He had fought men before, fought ghosts within himself as well, and he knew both battles demanded focus. A single shot cracked from the ridge. Dust splintered against the cabin wall. He dropped into a crouch, firing back with precise, practiced movements. One man went down, rolling into dirt. The girl slipped out of the shadows, revolver in hand. Her aim was cold and exact. Another man fell, clutching his leg. The canyon echoed with gunfire, each crack and pop of punctuation in the tense silence that had preceded it. The remaining men hesitated, reassessing the fight. The cowboy used the pause to pull another round, keeping his movements deliberate, measured. A sudden shout drew his attention. A rider was maneuvering to flank them. The girl anticipated it, stepping into the open just long enough to fire. The man collapsed motionless, and silence fell like a heavy blanket. Only the wind stirred, rattling loose stones along the canyon floor. He leaned against the cabin wall, breath ragged. Blood seeped through his sleeve, warm and heavy. She stepped to his side, eyes scanning him quickly. "You're bleeding," she said softly. "Nothing new," he muttered. His smile was weak, almost wry. "Guess I'm due for it." The girl's hands pressed against his wound, steady and unflinching. Her fingers worked with quiet authority, each motion precise, each touch a promise that she would not let him fall. He looked at her, admiration and something heavier in his eyes. "You fight better than I expected," he said. "You taught me," she replied, her voice even, a mirror of the desert's harsh clarity. He shook his head. "I don't recall much teaching, just surviving." His eyes softened, tracing the line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the unwavering strength in her gaze. "Still, you're alive. That counts for something." Outside, the last of the riders regrouped, assessing the losses. The canyon held him in its wide, silent grasp, the walls reflecting the heat and light like molten metal. He knew they would not give up easily. There were always more men ready to take what they sought. But he also knew this stand, this moment, could change the path that had brought them here. He drew a shallow breath and reached for the locket he had carried, pressing it into her palm. She opened it to reveal the faded photograph, her mother's face staring back, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She was my mother," she whispered. He nodded. "Then it belongs with you now." A final shot rang out far off, signaling the retreat of the surviving men. Dust rose in ghostly columns, fading into the heat haze. The cowboy sank against the cabin wall, his strength ebbing, blood soaking through his clothing. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, her body a shield and anchor. He smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "You were never half price," he said, voice barely above a whisper. His breath slowed, the edges of consciousness fraying. She sat beside him, the locket glinting in the dawn light, the wind carrying the scent of dust and iron and blood. He reached up, brushing her hair back gently, a gesture heavier with meaning than words could hold. The sun rose higher, spilling gold across the canyon floor. She built a cairn of stones over him, placing his hat atop it. Each stone was deliberate, final, a testament to survival, loss, and honor. She mounted his horse and paused at the ridge, taking in the vast expanse before her. The world stretched endless, harsh, and beautiful. The locket rested against her chest, a tether to the past and a compass for what lay ahead. As she urged the horse forward, the wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying a sound like his voice, low, rough, and steady. "Ride free." She did, and the canyon swallowed her, vast and silent, carrying her across the desert as the sun blazed in the sky, a witness to the end of one story and the beginning of another.